They thought the deal was sealed the moment I walked out of that boardroom. But what they didn't know, what they could never guess, was that I had taken something with me. The technology, the architecture, the core of what made their future possible. It wasn't theirs. And neither was I. That Thursday morning, I walked into the 43rd floor conference room of Avalon Ventures in downtown San Francisco. The entire south wall was glass, overlooking the bay. I wasn't nervous. I had no reason to be. My name is Amelia Keller, and for the past 3 years, I've been building something extraordinary, a real-time risk modeling engine that could scan 9 major economic verticals and forecast high-impact financial shifts with stunning accuracy. Not just respond to changes, predict them before they arrived. And today, the most influential venture capital firm on the West Coast was here to witness it. On one side of the table, tailored suits, expressionless faces, Avalon senior partners with eyes that had seen billions flow in and out of startups. Behind me, standing like security detail rather than support, were my company's executives, headed by our CEO, Darren. They didn't say much. They never did. That was fine. They hadn't built what I had. I connected my laptop to the main display, fingers steady, breath even. Good morning, I began. Today you're going to see why this model doesn't just assess risk. It defines opportunity. 16 minutes. That's all I needed. I walked them through live simulations, a test on last quarter's market shock, and benchmark comparisons. The model outperformed the leading industry platforms by over 30%. Not hypothetical, not projected, proven. Silence followed, the kind that either precedes a bombshell or applause. Then Jonathan Marcus, the senior managing partner at Avalon, leaned in. That, he said, was the first demo today that didn't waste our time. Darren chuckled from behind me. We aimed to impress. But Marcus didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed locked on mine. Who led the design? I did, I replied. He nodded. Keep on the project. We're moving forward. It was subtle, but clear. He didn't say they'd invest in the company. He said they'd move forward with me. I walked out with my head high. Not because I felt victorious, but because for the first time in months, I felt seen. Not as a support role. Not as a background technician. As the architect. If only that feeling had lasted. The next morning, the energy in the office was electric. Laughter echoed off glass walls. Champagne flutes clinked at every corner, and balloons floated above whiteboards that had been blank for weeks. Darren had gone all out, catered breakfast, gold-lettered banners, even a massive cake that said, $1.8 billion secured. The future is now. I stood just outside the break room, coffee cooling in my hand. No one noticed me. No one handed me a glass or called me over. My name wasn't on the banner. My name wasn't mentioned in the speeches. I didn't even get a slice of cake. Less than 24 hours ago, I stood in front of Avalon's top brass and delivered the pitch that turned their interest into commitment. I'd shown them the model, answered every question, ran live demos in front of partners who typically give tech demos 15 seconds before checking their watches. I did that. Not Darren. Not anyone on that so-called executive team. Me. And yet, here I was, watching from the hallway as my work was celebrated by everyone except me. I checked my calendar. No strategy session. No debrief. No invite to the investor follow-up call. My entire day was blank. Not even a thank you email. While I walked past the main floor, I heard Darren giving a speech that could have been copied from a CEO starter kit. This is the result of vision, leadership, and relentless pursuit of excellence, he said, voice booming across the floor like he was delivering a State of the Union. We didn't just close a deal. We set a new standard. The crowd applauded. People clapped, toasted, smiled, and I stood alone by the kitchenette like a ghost. That's when Leo approached. He was a junior analyst, a recent Stanford grad, bright-eyed, and a little too honest for corporate life. He looked around first, as if making sure no one was watching. Then he leaned in and whispered, "This might sound weird, but aren't you the one who built the model?" I blinked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I am." He looked puzzled. "I was reviewing the internal documentation they passed out this morning. Your name's not in the architecture file. It just says, core system finalized by executive leadership. I figure it was a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, forcing a smile. It's just how things work here. Leo frowned. But Greg didn't even mention you. That seems wrong. I shrugged. It's not the first time. But inside, something cracked. This wasn't just about being forgotten. I was being erased deliberately. My name was being scrubbed from the architecture, from the project timeline, from the company's narrative. I was no longer the mind behind the machine. I was a footnote they were rewriting into thin air. Back at my desk, I found a gift box on my chair. Inside was a branded notebook, a company pen, and nothing else. No card, no signature, just a quiet, passive reminder that I wasn't essential anymore. I had been useful. Now, I was decoration. The celebration roared behind me, but I sat frozen. The simulation platform I'd built from scratch, the analytics engine I'd poured 3 years of my life into, it was their crown jewel now. But I wasn't part of the story. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even in the room. I should have felt angry. I didn't. Not yet. What I felt was hollow. Like I just watched someone walk off with a piece of me, smiling, as if it had always been theirs. But that was the thing about erasure. It doesn't happen with a bang. It creeps. It whispers. It starts with a name left off a slide deck, a signature removed from a blueprint, a missing calendar invite. And if you're not careful, one day, you wake up and realize they've built a monument on your work and buried your name beneath it. I didn't know it then, but that day was the first time I truly understood what betrayal looked like in corporate America. And it was only getting started. It happened at 3:02 a.m. A soft chime from my phone pulled me out of a dreamless sleep. I blinked at the glowing screen on my nightstand, assuming it was a server alert or some internal system ping. But it wasn't. It was an email, flag high priority, from a generic HR address I didn't recognize. Subject: compensation adjustment effective immediately. Still half asleep, I sat up and opened it. The message was short, sterile, devoid of any context or human touch. Due to strategic realignment of departmental resources, your base salary will be adjusted by 42%. This change reflects evolving organizational priorities and takes effect this pay cycle. That was it. No explanation. No meeting. No prior warning. Just a 42% pay cut dropped in my inbox in the middle of the night like a surgical strike. I reread it. Twice. Then a third time, trying to convince myself I was misinterpreting it. I wasn't. They were slicing away nearly half of my compensation, days after I had landed the biggest investment deal in company history. No mention of the model. No acknowledgement of my role. Just a number, a percentage, and a corporate disclaimer at the bottom. By the time I arrived at the office later that morning, my badge no longer granted access to the engineering floor. I had to wait near reception until Leo spotted me and awkwardly offered to walk me in. "I think they moved your desk," he muttered, eyes fixed on his tablet as we walked past the main floor. They had. My new workstation was shoved into a forgotten corner near the emergency stairwell. No natural light, no monitors, and certainly no connection to the rest of the team. The familiar folders I used every day, locked. The simulation environment I'd spent hundreds of late nights perfecting, now marked as restricted access. I tried logging in. Denied. I wasn't fired. Not officially. I was still employed. Still under contract. But they had taken everything meaningful from my role and dumped me into a shell of a job that barely required a pulse. An hour later, Darren strolled past like he didn't even recognize me. He stopped, briefly, just long enough to toss a line in my direction. "Got your email?" he asked, his voice slick with smugness. I stared at him, too stunned to reply. "No explanation." "Huh," he added with a smirk. "You were getting too comfortable, Amelia. Too visible. Too visible." The words lodged in my chest like glass. "I built the thing you're celebrating," I said, stepping toward him. My voice was low, controlled, but sharp. He leaned in, dropping his voice to a whisper. "You built it under our roof. You were compensated. You should know your place." Then he walked away, like he'd just delivered a routine correction. That moment didn't shatter me. It didn't spark an explosion. It did something worse. It froze me, like a crack forming slowly under ice. Quiet, deep, dangerous. They thought I would swallow it. They thought I had no fight left. but they had no idea what I still held in my hands. The real power wasn't in the office access or the paychecks. It wasn't even in the title. It was in what I had built and what I had protected long before they realized its worth. The silence was louder than anything Darren could have shouted. But silence wouldn't be my ending. Not this time. The day after the pay cut, everything felt wrong. The usual rhythm of the office, the chatter near the espresso machine, the hum of keyboards, the quiet nods exchanged in passing, had vanished. In its place was something colder, stiller, like I'd slipped into a parallel version of the company where I no longer existed. I stepped into the building, expecting at least the courtesy of a morning greeting. But the receptionist, who once asked me about my weekend plans, barely looked up. Two project leads I'd mentored on their first product launches walked by, eyes fixed ahead like I was invisible. And maybe I was. My new desk was still there, wedged between an old filing cabinet and a flickering overhead light that buzzed every 30 seconds like a dying insect. The chair squeaked every time I shifted my weight. A single lonely plant someone must have forgotten sat dying beside me. Half its leaves brown, the rest folded inward like it, too, had given up. But it wasn't the space that broke me. It was the silence. No Slack messages. No meeting invites. No emails. Just a hollow inbox and an empty calendar. It was like I had been erased from the system, my existence too inconvenient to acknowledge. I pretended to work. I clicked through outdated project files, tried to open system folders, each time greeted with the same brutal reply, access denied. It was around 11 when I noticed Leo hovering nearby, clutching a thick folder like it might burn through his fingers. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly debating whether to approach. I looked up and gave a small nod. He stepped closer, voice low. "Hey, I wasn't sure if I should." "It's okay," I said. "What is it?" He opened the folder, flipping to a schematic filled with notations and code references. "They asked me to review this before next week's investor handoff. But honestly, I don't understand half of it. And I was hoping you could maybe clarify a few." Greg's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Leo, my office." Now, Leo stiffened. He looked like someone had just slapped him. Without a word, he turned and hurried away, folder still in hand. 5 minutes later, the same file was quietly returned to my desk. Folded shut. No questions asked. No answers expected. I opened it anyway, flipping through the pages without hope, until I reached the architecture spec. And there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. No mention of me. No credits. No signatures. No trace that I had ever laid a finger on the design. My entire existence had been removed, like someone had taken a scalpel to the past and carved me out of it. My stomach dropped. My hands froze. That cold weight I hadn't been able to name finally settled in my chest. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being erased by people who used to beg me to stay late, who couldn't fix a build without my guidance, who praised my model until it got them what they wanted. And now, with $1.8 billion on the line, they wanted me gone from the story altogether. I sat there for a long time, staring at that page, letting the reality sink in. Every sacrifice, every late night, every line of code vanished like it had never happened. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. I felt empty, numb, like the silence had swallowed me whole. And then, like a flicker of static in a dead channel, something sparked. A single thought. I wrote the rules before they even knew the game existed. And maybe, just maybe, they had finally played one move too many. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or rant or even talk about it to anyone. I just walked home under the pale glow of streetlights, my heels tapping the pavement like a metronome in a song I no longer wanted to hear. San Francisco was cold that evening, the kind of chill that sinks into your collar and stays there, even when you're inside. My apartment, normally a place of peace, felt like a stranger. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared out the window at nothing at all. For the first time in weeks, I asked myself a question I had buried beneath deadlines and meetings and investor calls. Do they even have the right to take this from me? And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered back, "No, they don't." I stood slowly, walked to the hall closet, and reached for the old metal file box tucked beneath years of storage, behind a yoga mat I hadn't used in a year, under a stack of binders from grad school. It was heavier than I remembered. Dust clung to the lid, thick and undisturbed, like it hadn't been touched since I first put it there. I placed it on a coffee table, heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in days. Purpose. When I opened it, the scent of old paper and ink met me like a memory. Inside were the original drafts of my architecture, hand-sketched diagrams, printed blueprints, and technical specs with my name signed in the corner of every page. I'd save them, not because I thought I'd need them, but because part of me knew the day might come when proof was the only thing I had left. And there it was, a manila envelope, tucked in the back, a sticky note stuck to the front in my handwriting. Before employment, just in case. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a licensing agreement. My licensing agreement, drafted with my lawyer long before I ever signed my offer letter at Northbridge Analytics. Back when I still had doubts about whether a startup run by salesmen could really understand the thing I was building. It was precaution, nothing more. Or so I thought. I flipped to clause 6.3.4. I read it once, then again, and then I smiled. It was all there. Ironclad, legally sound, filed and signed before my first day on their payroll. The clause stated that in the event of unethical treatment, involuntary reassignment, or any actions in conflict with the original scope of my duties, the licensing agreement would immediately revoke all rights to the intellectual property provided by the licensor, me. In plain English, if they screwed me over, I could take it back. And they had. They absolutely had. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, the paper shaking just slightly in my hands. My chest rose slowly as I exhaled, a full breath for the first time in what felt like forever. My mind wasn't racing. My hands weren't clenched. I felt steady. For weeks, I had been shrinking under the weight of their betrayal. Now, I realized I had been holding the detonator the entire time. It wasn't over. Not even close. And just as that thought settled into me, something happened that could only be described as perfect timing. My personal inbox, when I hadn't checked in days, pinged a single new message. No subject. No signature. From Jonathan Marcus, Avalon Ventures. The man who sat across from me during the demo. The man who asked who had built the model. The message was just one line. Hypothetically speaking, if your architecture were to function independently of Northbridge systems, would it still operate at full capacity? Just curious. I stared at the screen, pulse steady, but rising. They knew. They saw it. They were watching. And they weren't tied to the company. They were tied to the product. My product. They had invested in what I built, and they knew the real architect had been pushed out. For the first time, I understood the leverage I held. Not just morally, legally, functionally. I had the code. I had the proof. I had the model in its original form. They had tried to erase me, but I was still here. And now I wasn't afraid. I closed the email, opened a blank document, and typed 3 words. Take it back. Not for revenge. Not for ego. But for something far more powerful. Restoration. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to beg. And I sure as hell wasn't going to disappear. If they wanted a future built on my creation, they were going to have to face the truth. And this time, the truth had my name on it. The next morning didn't begin like most mornings. There was no alarm, no calendar alert, no list of tasks waiting to be ticked off in my inbox. Just me, the rising sun outside my window, and a decision that felt like the first breath after drowning. At 6:30 a.m., I brewed a strong pot of coffee, pulled out the dusty old laptop I hadn't touched in years, and sat at the kitchen table like it was a war room. This machine, unconnected to Northbridge's network, was my original sandbox. It held the earliest iterations of the risk model, the raw simulations, the wild what-if scenarios I used to run late into the night. No company fingerprints. No access trails. Just mine. I opened my encrypted external drive and began sifting through the files, original algorithms, time-stamped research notes, private build logs. Each one bore my initials in the metadata. It was like reading old letters to myself from a time when I still believed people would do the right thing. By 9 a.m., I had gathered everything I needed. By 10 o'clock, I was drafting a legal notice, clean, precise, and devastating. Termination of licensing rights under Clause 6.3.4 of the IP agreement. Effective immediately. By noon, it was notarized. By 4 p.m., it had been hand-delivered to Northbridge's legal department by a private courier. No confrontation, no announcement, just a quiet legal severing of their foundation. They wouldn't even know what had hit them until they logged in and realized the ground beneath their $1.8 billion deal was gone. And I wasn't done. That evening, I made one more call. A small boutique law firm in Boston, specialists in IP separation and founder-side litigation. The lead attorney had worked with Avalon Ventures before. When I mentioned my name and the nature of the model, I didn't have to explain much. They knew the type of games companies like Northbridge played. They didn't hesitate. On Monday, Keller Dynamics LLC was officially registered. A real company. A clean name. My name. I leased a small office suite in a co-working space just 2 blocks from my apartment. It wasn't much, just a glass-walled room with one desk, one chair, and the promise of something bigger. But it was mine. No bad air. No flickering lights. No erasure. The mission was clear. Refine the model. Rebuild it. Outrun them. I spent the next few days alone, fingers flying across keys, rewriting old code, optimizing algorithms that had been watered down under Northbridge's bureaucracy. The version they had access to was slow, bloated, half-functional. What I was building now moved like lightning through a neural net. It adapted in real time, using new data streams that hadn't even existed when I first created it. Faster, smarter, undeniably mine. And I told no one. Silence, I had learned, wasn't always the enemy. Sometimes it was strategy. But silence has a way of breaking, usually when you least expect it. That Thursday afternoon, just as the sun began to cast long golden streaks across the floor, there was a knock on the glass door. I looked up. It was Leo. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, hesitant, unsure if he was allowed to cross into this new world I was building. His eyes searched mine through the glass like he was asking for permission, not just to step inside, but to choose a side. I opened the door. He stepped in, took one long look at the glowing screens behind me, then whispered, "So, this is real?" "It's real," I said, "and it's only the beginning." He nodded slowly. Then his voice dropped even lower. "If you need someone to help build this, someone who's not interested in politics or credit grabs, just truth, I've already picked my side." I looked at him, really looked. This kid, barely out of grad school, had more integrity than half the executive board. He had seen what they did to me, watched the silence, the exclusion, the erasure. And here he was, showing up when it mattered. I didn't smile. I didn't make a speech. I just pulled out a second chair and said, "I hope you're ready to work weekends." And just like that, Keller Dynamics wasn't mine alone anymore. It was becoming ours. The conference room was colder than I remembered. Not in temperature, but in energy. Sterile. Calculated. Every surface gleamed like it had been scrubbed of fingerprints and memory. It was the same boardroom where I had once pitched the future. The same one where I had stood in front of Avalon's partners and made their jaws tighten with interest. Except this time, I wasn't here to ask for approval. I was here to watch everything unravel. Greg stood at the head of the table, flanked by his loyal executives, all dressed in carefully coordinated suits, gray-blue, neutral, forgettable. It looked like a brochure, like they'd rehearsed this moment in a mirror all night. On the screen behind him, slides clicked forward. Projections, timelines, phrases like synergistic expansion and data-led optimization. It was corporate theater, but I wasn't here for the performance. I sat at the far end of the table, no nameplate in front of me, no introduction. Just a guest badge clipped to my jacket, the kind they give interns and vendors. Leo sat beside me, quiet, composed, his jaw set like stone. We had gone over every possible outcome, mapped out scenarios like chess players running mental simulations. We knew what was coming. The only variable left was how hard it would hit. Greg clicked to the final slide. As you can see, he said, "Our deployment roadmap ensures complete model integration by Q4. Benchmark metrics already indicate 30% performance improvements across predictive scenarios." A beat of silence. Then, from the far end of the table, Jonathan Marcus leaned back. His expression unreadable, his fingers still for the first time all meeting. He wasn't tapping his pen. He wasn't looking at the slides. He was staring at Greg. Then came the voice, measured, quiet, and deliberate. Thank you, Greg. Before we proceed, there's one last confirmation we'll need. Greg smiled, nodding as if this were expected. Of course. Legal compliance, due diligence. Marcus held up a hand. No. Intellectual property clearance. We need written confirmation from the original architect that the model is authorized for commercial deployment under your company's name. The heir left the room. Greg paused, just once, but it was long enough to be noticed. Our tech is owned internally, he said too quickly. Fully integrated. No external licensing required. Jonathan tilted his head slightly. That's not what I asked. His tone sharpened just enough to cut. We need a direct acknowledgement from Amelia Keller. Every head turned to me. Greg laughed. Tight. Hello. Ms. Keller is here as a courtesy, he said. She's not involved in the signature process. She is now, Marcus replied. Avalon doesn't finalize a $1.8 billion deal without confirming who truly owns the architecture we're investing in. I didn't speak. Not yet. I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Heavy with authority. Thick with truth. Jonathan opened it, scanned the header, and nodded once. Greg tried to recover, his voice rising just enough to betray his panic. She can't do this. The system is embedded. It's part of our infrastructure. But is it licensed? Marcus asked. Greg froze. He didn't have an answer. Jonathan turned back to me. Amelia, is the architecture still fully functional under your control? Yes, I said, and it's improved. Faster. More secure. Entirely independent. He didn't hesitate. Then we'll proceed. With Keller Dynamics. Gasps followed like thunder. Greg's face drained of color. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice cracking. No, Marcus replied, standing calmly. We're correcting one. Leo leaned over and whispered. They have no idea how far behind they are now. And he was right. Greg had just watched $1.8 billion walk out of the room, and I hadn't even raised my voice. At exactly 8:02 the next morning, it went live. The press release wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need to be. The headline did all the work. Avalon Ventures invests $1.8 billion in Keller Dynamics, redefining predictive intelligence for the next decade. My name was right there at the top, not buried in the fourth paragraph, not mentioned as a former employee. It was the opening line, the face of the deal, the architect, not the accessory. Within minutes, it was everywhere, TechSlate, The Wall Journal, Market Edge. The headline spread like fire across every corner of the startup world. Investors, founders, analysts, they all saw it. And so did everyone still sitting inside Northbridge's glass tower. By 8:30, my phone had lit up with unread messages. Some from former coworkers who once looked through me in the hallway. Some apologizing. Some asking for jobs. A few had the nerve to ask if I'd consider consulting for them on a side project. I ignored most of them. But one message stood out. It came from Leo. Not a question, not a request. Just, we're building something better. And they finally see it. Our new office wasn't a monument. It didn't need to be. It was clean, sunlit, and honest. A place where nothing was stolen, and no one's name was missing from the architecture files. The glass walls reflected who we were, 12 of us, including me and Leo. Every single person had left Northbridge willingly. Some quietly, others loudly. But all of them came because they believed in the truth of what we were building. Leo sat across from me now, poring over our roadmap, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The title on his business card read Chief Technology Officer. He'd earned it, not just through skill, but through loyalty and that impossible-to-measure moment when someone chooses principle over comfort.